Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, December 27th, 2018. We're back on the air live. No particular reason for it. I don't think anything happened while we were gone. There was a Christmas holiday, as it turns out. Did any of you enjoy that? That was pretty good. I don't know if any of you believe still in Santa Claus. I'm sure at whatever age you are at, it's more than marginal. And you will have heard that story already, of course. Donald Trump having, ruined Christmas. I don't think the family who was on the other end of the line when their 7-year-old daughter called NORAD to try and get an update on where Santa was. You know how they do that stuff. I don't know why that still works during the shutdown, but I guess whatever. NORAD certainly is essential employees. I don't know if the person operating the Santa switchboard really is, but it's obviously important to somebody somewhere, NORAD or wherever in the government, that we continue to, perpetrate this. Well, no, not hoax. I'm not going to go and say that. I mean, after all, Santa Claus is totally real. If you're listening, kids, be good. I'm not certain why that survives the shutdown, except other than it really, then that would cause anger. People would get all upset. My child still believes in Santa Claus. I want them to be able to track him with NORAD. I don't know. That's a really great thing. Yes, the military is tracking Santa's movements. I don't think they have any plans to shoot him down, nothing like that. It's just kids want to know where Santa is. The magic and mystery. Why isn't he like a vampire? He doesn't show up in mirrors, and he's not visible to over-the-horizon backscatter radar either. I don't know why that isn't just part of the myth, but I guess Dickens didn't know about that, and as you know, we only do what Christmas demands in America, only what Charles Dickens saw in England in the 1800s. I don't know. Not certain why he has such a grip on our Christmas celebrations, but he does. Anyway, but that would cause serious anger, and people then would be furious, Republicans probably, furious with the shutdown, and isn't that the idea, and it's supposed to demand action of people, but whatever, fine. I don't know how often we've run into that. The end of the year isn't the end of the fiscal year, usually by now. I wonder about that. I'm trying to think back how many times, if ever. I mean, the Trump era has been kind of weird. We may have had another end of the year and Christmas holiday time shutdown before in the past. I don't know. But they really perhaps ought to think about. Well, they're not going to change that. We'll get gun laws reformed before they change the Santa tracking. Anyway, you've heard the story by now. The 7-year-old girl called in. Donald Trump takes the phone calls. It's sort of a tradition for whatever reason. I guess tradition stretching as far back as NORAD. So it's not that big of a deal, I guess. Plus long distance telephone switching, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, you call, and the president and first lady occasionally, I guess, answer random phone calls and lie to children about where Santa Claus is. Not the existence of Santa Claus. They just don't know where he is, but they pretend like they do. And this one girl gets I don't know if it's the first call of the night, last call of the night, only call of the night. And he says, still believe in Santa because it's 7. She's 7 years old. It's marginal. Weirdest thing about the clip, one, not really that he chose to do that. I mean, you are playing a role here, and I don't understand why he can't stay in the role, except he's a dotard. But 2, of course, as other people have pointed out, he lies all day long about everything. The one time we're like, it's okay to lie, sir. He's like, blah, 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 the truth is there's no Santa. Oh, can't believe it. So he ruined that. Whatever. The family doesn't think that they ruined Christmas. They're all thrilled. They talk to the president. I don't know if they're huge supporters or Republicans or neither or both, but they don't seem too upset about it. And it's not a terribly upsetting thing, really, obviously. But the other thing that was odd about it, as others observed, he breaks into what is perhaps the most genuine looking and almost warm smile I've ever seen him display. And of course, it's because he's ruined Christmas for a child, and that warms his heart, or the cockles of his heart, as people used to say, even though I never really figured out what cockles were. But that's another story, and we're not talking about that, and it's really for the curriculum committee to decide whether or not we learn about that in school. Anyway, moving on to the rest of the agenda for the day, if there is one. It is December 27th. It's Kwanzaa. Happy Kwanzaa. I don't know how popular Kwanzaa... Did it? I can't tell whether it caught on or didn't. But for a while, we were all more conscious of including Kwanzaa in our Happy Holidays roundup. And then it sort of seemed to fall off the radar for me. But, maybe it was because it was more important to talk about whether or not police were shooting African Americans than what they were celebrating during the holidays. So, I don't know. I guess we had different and more important things on our mind. But it is Kwanzaa. Kwanzaa starts... how do they determine when it starts? I don't think I know enough about it. I grew up after they would have perhaps taught that to us in school. And so I didn't hear anything about it, although they could have told us about it. It was in existence, I believe. Anyway, we'll figure out, anyway, but it's like the second day. It started on the 26th. Does it typically start on Boxing Day? Does it share Boxing Day with the 26th, or is it a third, whatever it is? What's today's date even? I don't know, day rather. It's Thursday. So yesterday was Wednesday. So the last Wednesday in December. I never learned anything about it except that they have the candles and it's very nice, and that's about it. That and Rush Limbaugh will make fun of it. So I learned a great deal about it, obviously, in my background. I'll have to check that out. It's something that is on my Don't Be So White checklist for... I don't know. Let's make it next year. A New Year's resolution. I'll figure out what... I'm going to fail in that resolution horribly. But only one of many, which I will fail in. Anyway, we'll be talking to Greg Dworkin in a little bit, and he's already collecting his story. In fact, he's collecting Kwanzaa stories for me, so we can catch up on that. That's good. That's what we need, like a producer for. If I blow it off and say I'll learn about it next year or something like that, I'll never remember. So thankfully we have it here. Yeah, December 26th. Okay, so it's a set date. December 26th through January 1st. That makes sense. January 1st is a great ending date for that. Introduced in 1966, so we certainly could have learned about it in school, but that would have been a pretty quick move for my mostly white suburban school to have introduced that in say, the elementary level. But much more widely recognized and taught these days. And it's real because there's a Hallmark card section for it, if you had any doubt about it. So at least we have that. All right, we'll round up the rest of the news. Here comes Greg, and he's probably like, please stop with the Kwanzaa. You're killing yourself. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I'm happy because it's Kwanzaa.
Yeah, well, it's good to bring up some of my friends.
I would like to acknowledge
certainly
it.
Celebrate
Jeez.
it, so it's nice.
Yeah, I have to find like a more solid ground for acknowledging it, I think. I saw it on the calendar and I said, oh, yes. And then I neglected to learn about it. So now I will.
All right. So anyway, so you know a little bit more about it now.
Yes.
A lot happened since the last time I was on the show, but that's often the case because things in politics here seem to work at lightning speed. I think, one of the big stories from yesterday, again, it was interesting for those of us who remember how the press used to handle George W. Bush and his fake turkey trip
to
Iraq, where he went to see the troops and he held a fake prop turkey, which was fine. I mean, it was really a good photo op.
Yes.
But the press described
joking.
it as serving turkey to the troops, which is not what he did.
No. As it turns, I mean, not to be an apologist for George W. Bush, but I think I understand he thought it was funny to pick up the rubber turkey.
Right.
And walk around with it.
It was good. It was a good photo op. And that's exactly right. And not to make too much of it one way or the other. My point only is how the media decides to cover it.
Yeah,
they decided that it would be a good thing to describe him as serving the troops, which really wasn't what happened in that photo op. So yesterday, Trump makes a surprise visit to Iraq. It wasn't a total surprise because plane spotters in the UK actually picked up Air Force One. In England they do train spotting. I mean, it's a thing.
Right.
There's this train at this time, and it's 35 seconds early. That's terrible.
Yeah, they're wild out there.
But they do plane spotting too.
Right.
And so on Twitter, somebody posted, "Oh, this looks like the call and the picture of Air Force One. I wonder if he's going to the Middle East."
Yeah.
So it turned out he was.
Yes. Apparently they were flying under a different call sign. I saw that tweet, and I don't know why they would do that, except, I mean,
to fool you.
I guess so. I'm sure it's operational security in some form, but I mean, usually there's a bunch of other planes around. But I guess
they probably told Trump that if they did that, it would make the plane invisible.
Maybe that's right. That's right.
They had to, because he was totally scared, and that's what happened. He actually told people about that when he landed.
Yeah.
So I'm not worried about me. I'm worried about the presidency. Oh yeah, my wife too. But sure. I wasn't scared when it was all dark and you couldn't see and we didn't know what was going on. I wasn't scared.
Yeah.
But it was terrifying. And
he has
here
said
he is
that
landing
he's
in a war zone, and instead of saying to the troops, I'm here for you. Yeah. Again, it was all about him. So Ayman Mohyeddin from MSNBC tweets, President Trump spent 3 hours in Iraq. He lied about 10% pay increase to troops. He revealed classified identity of Navy SEALs because he took photo ops with them and selfies, which you're not supposed to do.
Right.
And he possibly violated rules against political activity on a military base. Because while he was there, he was touting his wall and immigration policy.
Yes, and he had help in that. All the troops were violating the policy as well.
Yeah. So anyway, so there was that. But
thank you.
Again, the hope. What's that?
I said, but thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service. It's just, it's interesting
I understand
to see that the press tried to deal with this long-awaited presidential pivot and just work hard, sweating, shaking with the effort of just trying to normalize him. It's just so amazing. They still try to do that.
Yes. Well, they were in an audience, at least part of the audience was very excited to see him. And so they went into rally mode, oh my God, we might get beat up if we, aren't enthusiastic about this. And after all, it's
hard to know. I mean, you have Ayman Mohyeddin who actually, is citing the facts.
Well, they quickly lie or cite all the lies. Once they get to the filing center, they're happy to do all of that.
Yeah, but you have Terry Moran from, I guess, ABC saying just, what a wonderful thing that he was here. It's just so heartwarming. And,
it's the most one. All right, yeah.
And you go, stop. Would you just stop already? I mean, it's clear that Trump doesn't do anything except for his own benefit. He wasn't there for the troops.
No. He was there to get rid of the headlines of, do you know that he has never visited the troops deployed in theater ever? And he's the only president to do that since...
pretty much. And so the troops are happy to see him. It was a good thing that he went. And that can be true at the same time that you can point out that he lied about all this stuff. His motives are suspect. And his execution was pretty bad.
Yeah. I will credit him for one thing, barely, which is he was reading headlines on Wednesday. He sucks. He never goes to visit the troops. He's the worst. He's an irresponsible president. He hates the military, And then they brought up that made people say, oh, yeah, by the way, I've been holding on to this other story. Now would be the time to mention it. We found maybe the podiatrist who wrote him what might perhaps have been the garbage excuse that kept him out of Vietnam. So that's kicking back up again. So then he said, damn it, I order you to take me to Iraq right now on Air Force One. Let's go.
Right. Since logistics of moving a president to a war zone like Iraq do take a while, it probably wasn't an impromptu, spontaneous decision on Christmas morning or New Year's Eve morning, whatever day he left. And that probably actually took place a bit before then. But not much before.
The day before. I don't think everybody. Maybe that's why they were flying under a different call sign, because they didn't get to do the usual logistics. But it seems to have been a very quick turnaround. So my credit to him for saying, "Look, I got to fix this," and I'm sure they got pushback. We need 3 days. I give you 1. I'm going, and so you get a thing done. And I'm sure his fans loved that, except the fans are committed to the fiction that Dinesh D'Souza is trying to circulate. No, this was planned for a long time. They had this in the works. He didn't. He was supposed to be in Mar-a-Lago, etc. But so partial credit for just saying, damn it, I'm going to change this story right now. I'm going to get up and go.
Well, that is the one thing he is very good at. He is very good at manipulating the media.
Yes. He tricked them into believing that he had a handle on this whole thing. But, yeah, so he gets up and goes, and I guess it just, although, like I said, this now highlights how many times he could have gone, but instead went golfing. He's great at ordering, we're going to play golf on at the drop of a hat, but not visiting the troops. Now that he knows how to do it, he still won't do it.
The whole point I guess I was trying to make yesterday was that this doesn't change anything.
Not much.
I mean, he did this. You can give him credit for this or not credit for this or whatever you want to do. It doesn't change anything. He still is the same person he was before this 3-hour trip. That's how much time he spent there.
I see.
In addition, by the way, he also violated a protocol because he didn't get a hold of the Iraqi prime minister.
Yeah, well, he was busy.
So we own the country. I don't need to ask him permission. We just come into our base, say hello, and leave. What's the problem?
Right, I own that base. It's mine. I might even build a hotel on it. Yeah, that's true. All right, all those things.
But it's important, to build up the whole idea that everybody respects us.
Yes, everyone loves us
because we respect everybody else and love everybody else. That's how it works.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there was a lot of foolishness going on. There's also, like you said, shouldn't have been any political activity mixed in there. A lot of the troops apparently very excited. Trump supporters brought out their MAGA hats to get signed.
That's fine.
Well, apparently it's not. But,
you're not supposed to do that, but that's the least of the issues with Donald Trump.
Possibly.
It really is. I mean, I'm not going to pick on the troops. Let's just say that
we'll just say
Trump is not worthy of that kind of attention.
Yeah.
And then he's going to come back, and everything is still the same. The place is still shut down. He has no idea what to do about it.
Right.
Nancy Pelosi said, steel slats, beaded curtain, whatever.
Right, yes, great one.
I'll see you on January 3rd.
Yeah, and word is that, this was sort of a no-brainer, but January 3rd, once all the initial business is taken care of, the Dems in the House will probably drop the same language that they voted on the other day, no wall
Continuing
funding.
CR. They're not going to solve the whole thing, but they'll do a CR for more negotiation.
Yeah.
Which I think is what the Senate passed by voice vote.
Yes. So they'll just put that back on the floor. The House will pass it easily. They passed it the first time under Republican control. Now there's a majority Democrats. There's no issue. And they'll kick it back to the Senate and say, go ahead and reject the bill you passed by voice vote last time if you wish.
Or accept it and send it to the president for his veto, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
we'll see what happens.
If Trump says, well, I'm going to keep it shut for the next year, you can just override him, and maybe you should.
Yeah, well, that's what it's in there for. You love the Constitution, don't you?
Yeah, well, there's process here.
Yeah. So, all right, well, that's, I guess that's our next move. For the moment, there's no plans to, reconvene Congress to try again between now and then. So we're shut down until the 3rd at minimum.
There's nothing to try. I think the media finally have realized that you really, and to be fair, you can't blame the Democrats because they don't have the majority in the House.
Always.
And to be fair, you can't even blame McConnell because how do you negotiate with the wind? Until Trump decides he knows what he wants and will stick to it, and McConnell and the Senate has a sense that he'll stick to it, they're not doing anything.
Yeah, there's no reason to. They just did negotiate, and he
that's why they adjourned. They didn't stay there to work.
Well, no, they were never going to do that. But they had a deal, and he walked away from it without telling them. So, yeah, they're not going to.
And then so McConnell said, fine, we'll adjourn. If you want us to come and work on something, you better give us something. Otherwise, bye. I'll see you when I have something concrete, and that concrete thing is going to come from Nancy Pelosi. And politically, what he's done is he set it up so that since the government is going to reopen at some point, then he's essentially saying, okay, Nancy won. I don't know why he wanted to do that.
He didn't know he was doing that, perhaps.
Well, she probably told him and he didn't listen.
Oh, yeah, well, it's not for lack of opportunities to know it. It's just he's him.
Yeah. So, it's very painful. I mean, one of the weird things about this country is that some things don't always work logically. And one of the things that doesn't work logically is that of all the different service branches, it turns out the Coast Guard is the one that winds up getting affected by this in terms of their paychecks.
Oh, really?
As opposed to the other services.
Huh. That is odd. And he loves the Coast Guard. I mean, he says I love the Coast Guard more than he says it about others, because it goes without saying, of course, for the others. But the Coast Guard, he feels, is a junior branch. But they're the ones that guard Mar-a-Lago. And so when he wants to visit the military during the holidays, he visits the Coast Guard because it's, a couple 100 feet down the road from Mar-a-Lago, and he goes to the Coast Guard station.
42,000 Coast Guard members are the only military branch to work
funny.
without pay during shutdown, says this NBC News story that I haven't sent you yet, but I'm about to. It says, for us to be cast aside, this is hurtful. We put so much on the line every day, said Emily Garris, wife of a Coast Guard member and mother of two.
People could be drowning out there. And we're like, oh, we're shut down.
Unless legislation is passed, our military workforce will not receive our regularly scheduled paycheck for 31 December, Chief Warrant Officer Allison Conroy said in a statement to NBC News. And that's because the military funds, Department of Defense, funds most of the military, but the Coast Guard is funded by the Department of Homeland Security. So the Department of Defense money continues, but the Department of Homeland Security, remember, this is all about security.
Yeah.
Right? The shutdown is about security. So the Department of Homeland Security doesn't have any money, so they're going to have to let children die under their care on the cheap.
Yes.
Instead of doing the fancy way.
I get you now. I see. I was confused about that, and I may have confused others about it. Other members of the military, because they're under the Department of Defense, which had an appropriations bill passed, because no one's going to not pass the defense appropriations bill.
Right.
They're getting paid because that part of the government isn't shut down. Homeland Security didn't get its funding, so it's shut down. They are essential. They're working. They're just not getting paid, just like everybody else. Non-essential people are not working and not getting paid.
But if you're essential, you have to work and you don't get paid.
Right.
And if you're essential, even if you were on vacation, you get called back so that you can work without pay.
Yeah, that's exciting too.
There's just, that's what I mean about the whole thing as being kind of wacky. And the people who are affected by this, are like real people. So the whole idea is, I'll just shut down for a year. What do we care?
Right.
Till I get what I want, screw all of you. You're all probably Democrats.
And
he
a lot of
said that.
Very good stories collected, and a lot of them tweeted around. Stories about the shutdown. Don't forget that there's lots of private sector stuff that has to shut down, and people who will therefore go without pay. As a result, usually the easiest to illustrate standby story, the private contractors who employ people to clean the offices of federal agencies, which are closed and no longer need cleaning or could pay for cleaning if they wanted it. And so you have a large and somewhat marginal, in terms of their employment stability, workforce who not only were living paycheck to paycheck, but get closed, and now there's next to zero demand in their sector at the moment. So there's not even any temporary
There's a Twitter hashtag called Shutdown Stories where you can read some of these things. This one is from Katie JB88. My husband is active duty Coast Guard. Everyone thinks the military is getting paid during the shutdown, but the Coast Guard is facing no pay on the first due to being DHS and not DOD. We live in New York City, pay over $2,000 a month in rent, have a toddler and one on the way. Shutdown stories. So these are the kinds of people that Trump, with his temper tantrum, is affecting. And, of course, he doesn't care because he figures they're all Democrats.
Yes.
And somehow being a Democrat justifies it.
Yeah.
That's the other weird part about it. Oh, well, he explained it. He's a Democrat, He's doing this to own the libs.
All right. Well, I hope that someone buys us libs from him and sells us to someone who's a more caring person.
Meanwhile, other weird things happen. Raw Story reported this one. A C-SPAN caller. C-SPAN is always interesting, and callers on C-SPAN are always interesting.
A sailor went to C-SPAN.
If not psychotic. A sailor went to C-SPAN. C-SPAN caller, I support Trump shutdown because it's getting us closer to the second coming of Jesus.
On C-SPAN?
Yeah.
Well, C-SPAN would probably cover that.
Yeah, well, it's but neutrally.
Yes.
They wouldn't take sides when the rapture came.
Right.
That's the nice thing about C-SPAN.
Christians call in on this line.
Right, and damned called in on that line.
Not taking sides here, just letting you know you're going to hell.
Right. That we call that the hotline. You call there.
What's the independence? But there's also independence. Christians, the damned, and independents.
Christians are there, the damned are there, and we have a third line for libertarians.
Christians, please stop calling in on the independent line. It's not fair here.
It's not fair. But it's a reminder that the Trump base actually is white evangelicals. We talked about this on the show, but sometimes you really need a reminder, and you wonder how come they're not changing? How come none of this stuff is putting them off? Because chaos is bringing them closer to the rapture. Stop expecting them to change.
Yes.
That's the Trump base.
Okay.
The rest of the Trump voters who aren't his hardcore base are actually peeling away a little bit. And there's story after story about how James Mattis firing and what's happening in Syria is actually making them extremely uneasy. But, again, a lot of this stuff still has to play out.
Yeah.
And we still have the Mueller stuff to come, which is going to come in the new year.
Well, that could be rapturous if it's not necessarily the second coming, but
that may take a while.
Yeah, I guess threatening nuclear war, etc., that could get us perhaps closer to the second coming as well. But it's good that they measure things this way. We'll come back for the second segment after this 2-minute break. It has nothing to do with Jesus, but if you prefer to think of it that way, I won't object. We'll be right back. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption, though it's still aimed at saying thank you to all of you who are supporters of the show. We've made a lot of progress. When we first started this campaign, fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners were donating to help keep us on the air, and now that's down to about 1 in 15, but we've got a long way to go. Remember, it won't take much. Our average monthly donation is currently about $7, for which you're getting 2 hours of great news and entertainment 5 days a week. What's that, 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal. But as a wage, well, I think Democrats would be against that. But if we all put our 70 cents together, or even half of us, that'd really be something. And my kids could go to college. Now, that's not all on you. But remember, patreon.com, Patreon.com, is there to make it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X, or David Waldman, or Kagro in the Morning, or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right there where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your continuing support. Welcome back to the show. We're back here with the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio, and having a small laugh in the background here. The C-SPAN story continues to amaze, Greg has sent me the story.
Well, here's the transcript.
Yeah, okay.
Right, a guy from New York City calls in, and they're talking about the shutdown, and he says to the host,
from New York City.
Right, John McCardle, the guy's from New York City, and the caller's name is Scott. And Scott says, hi, it's Scott, first time, long time.
Okay.
I don't really have a solution, Scott began, but I'm in support of this shutdown because I'm waiting for the second coming. We just celebrated the first coming, but Jesus is coming back, and as crazy as the government is, it's getting us closer. Now the solution to having a bill pay for the wall, Trump can do this by going after every business in America that got a tax break if they have any ties to any sister or baby companies offer them that have hired illegal aliens in the past.
What? Yeah.
And McCardle, the host, says, I got your point, Scott, and then cuts him off.
Okay. It's not much patience. And he doesn't look like a friendly guy, to be honest, in this picture. McCardle, he's really, he looks a little bedraggled, actually.
Well, listen, if you got calls like this all day, you'd look a little bedraggled, too.
I don't know whether he's intentionally growing this facial hair or what, but either they've had him on the air since the beginning of the shutdown and he's getting tired. He's got little bags under his eyes. And usually they're like unflappable, or at least in the classic way. Who is that long? Is he even still around? Their original longtime host. And I mean, you could set a bomb off under him, and he would just say,
he wouldn't
thank
move.
you for your call. Right? Yeah, I mean, it was admirable in a way, although boring as hell. It's like they have air traffic controllers working this thing. But he showed a little something there. Arnold did. You think you're of a different show. This is not a religious program. Interesting.
Was that Steve Scully? Was that?
I can't remember
the guy's name.
Me neither.
They always do have three lines, though, right? They have the Republican line, the Democratic line, and the bewildered line.
Yes.
You're supposed to call in on the right one, and they'll cut you off if you called in on the wrong one, because they want to give everybody a chance and be fair about it. But I think they should just do the bewildered line, because those are the most fun calls.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's usually where the wackiest ones tend to come in, or the least explicable ones. The weirdest ones, of course, are the Republican lines, always.
So other things that happened just that are worthy of mention. By the way, MSNBC topped Fox News in total viewers during the week of December 17th for the first time since 2000. It turns out Rachel Maddow's show is higher rated than Hannity's show.
Well, that's a sign of something.
So MSNBC is rising while Fox News is falling. CNN is doing fairly poorly. And it's interesting. And again, part of the argument that people have been making, true or not, is that whereas the populists are sticking with Fox because they have the White Power Hour with Tucker Carlson as well as Sean Hannity, the traditional conservatives are getting turned off a little bit about this stuff, and they're not watching as much. And so, again, we'll see what kind of ramifications that has. Normally, it's just sort of gossip to talk about networks, but this is actually the propaganda arm of the Republican Party. And so, in that sense, it has a political context, and it's a bit important to talk about. Yes. So if their viewership drops, there's a twofold meaning to that. On the one hand, it simply may reflect how their viewers are feeling about how the Trump presidency is going. And on the other hand, the less people that watch it, the less effective propaganda network you can be.
Yes, that's true.
So we do have all of that. In the pundit roundup today, and I'm substituting for Tim, who's on vacation. Oh. I did yesterday, I did today, I'll be doing Saturday, so we're doing a lot of pundit roundup. So we get to read a whole bunch of stuff.
Okay.
And here's one from the Huffington Post and YouGov. They did a poll of the shutdown.
Okay.
And we know how everyone, including all of our listeners, love polls. Can't get enough of them.
Right.
And you thought you weren't going to see any more polls now that the election's over, but no, that's not true. We still have polling.
You forgot polling.
Yeah. So everyone in Washington gets negative marks for the shutdown, but the Democrats fare comparatively better than the GOP. So if the question is asked, do you approve or disapprove of the following group's handling of the partial government shutdown so far? And you ask all Americans, they have a 22% approval of Congress as a whole and 55% disapproval. Republicans get a 26% approval, and Trump gets a 36% approval, and Democrats get a 36% approval, and your representatives in Congress get a 35% approval. So on the whole, you don't like Congress, you like your representatives a little bit better. Right now, Trump and Democrats are getting about equal approval. But when you look at disapprove, Trump gets a 50% disapprove, Democrats get a 45%, and Republicans get a 55%. So it turns out Republicans are getting a bit more of the negative numbers. Now, these don't prove anything one way or the other. They will obviously change if and when the shutdown goes on. But the starting point here is not to blame Democrats. I guess that's the point of the poll.
Okay.
That I take away from it.
Now, if I were called in this poll, and I see they're polling Congress as a whole, how do you feel? Congress as a whole, Republicans in Congress, President Trump, Democrats in Congress, your representatives in Congress. How do I answer that? It's a machine. Is it a machine poll or a live poll?
I think it's a machine poll.
So the machine tells me, what about, how do you feel about your representatives? Oh, well, then I don't take it. But your representatives in Congress, and I say, now, do you mean my current representative, Barbara Comstock, or you mean the incoming representative?
Yeah. Well, you have now. It's about your current because you don't have the incoming yet.
Okay. I mean,
you don't have Wesley yet.
What's the point of asking me how I feel about Barbara Comstock?
To get an idea of how you feel about the shutdown overall.
I guess so.
Not so much her. She's just the vehicle.
Once she's gone, it's over. So good.
And then they have some great comments that go with this. For example, they collected comments and posted them here as part of this thread that Ariel Edwards-Levy, the pollster reporter, did. And the first one she picks is, Colonel Bonespurs, the bloated orange pimple in our White House, wants to waste billions of our tax money, and the Republicans won't oppose his stupidity, but the Democrats will, so we won't sign what's necessary to keep the government operating until he gets the wall money to flush down the toilet. I wonder what line C-SPAN would have taken that one on.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Right? and then on the other side, a bunch of unnecessary government workers get sent home. Unnecessary, like the Coast Guard.
Yeah, right.
A bunch of unnecessary government workers get sent home because Democrats don't care about security, like the Coast Guard, and want to flood the country, like the Coast Guard, because like they're in the water. So they know all about flooding. Mm-hmm. They want to flood the country with illegals that they want to turn into Democrat voters.
Yes, and Coast Guardsmen.
Right, and Coast Guardsmen. So weird things.
Sounds like a good, fun, fair thing to do.
Right, so instead of opening up a fortune cookie and adding in bed at the end of every one of the fortunes, you should just add like the Coast Guard, because, with every comment they make, they show that they really don't understand anything about what's actually happening.
Yes, and I keep forgetting what's happening too. All right.
Right. And I'm just, Ariel Edwards-Levy is one of my favorite reporters. She's great at punning. But her pinned tweet is quite relevant. She says, my favorite thing about poll stories is that its entire beat devoted to the idea that what the public thinks truly matters.
Well, someone out there thinks
we know that's not necessarily the case, but I love the fiction.
It seems like something you'd have to tell yourself every day on that beat.
Mm.
Okay.
Yes. Bill Harnsberger, Bill from Portland, Maine, Bill in Portland, sends us this from AP. The two major blocs in the Iraqi parliament both condemned the visit, likening it to a violation of Iraqi sovereignty. Well, that's because you didn't ask, and they didn't want you, and you went anyway. And, it's, so not only do you wind up showing up lying, telling everybody about how scared you are, doing inappropriate politicking, and then leaving, you also create an international incident. So pretty good for 3 hours.
That's really, to pack that all in is remarkable, and it's a pivot. Yesterday is the day that he truly became president. Today is the day we talk about it.
Yeah, I suppose.
That's that's rather unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, we have the stock market to talk about. What goes down must come up, and what goes up must come down.
Yes.
And so it's been bouncing all over the place. It's going to be especially volatile because there's less humans and more robots trading these days.
True.
And robot traders just instantly react rather than thinking about what they're doing. So you have the market plunge 600 on Christmas Eve, and then you have it go up 1,100 points yesterday, and who knows what they're going to do today. And, all of this is happening in the background of Trump having two major issues. Now, it's already down 270 points today. So awesome. The idea that yesterday just took care of all the problems is something Trump would think, but nobody actually thinks that, certainly not on Wall Street.
Right.
And Trump is in this odd situation where he has to have a good stock market in his mind and build that wall in order to get reelected.
Wall Street. It's all of a piece.
Right, exactly.
We have a caller on the
once
robot
upon a time,
line,
there really
as a
was a
matter of
wall
fact.
on Wall Street, which
Yes.
is why it's called that. But that was,
It's
some
easy enough to know name-wise.
centuries ago.
Very
But the
creative
whole
people.
idea that he will push it because he needs it, and it's all about him, makes it very difficult to see exactly how the shutdown ends on his doing. People say, well, Congress is never going to override Trump, just the way they say they'll never impeach him. But you know what? I think it's going to come to that.
Okay.
In both cases. I think they're just going to have to because they don't want to, but that's the only way to get anything done.
I wish they would.
I think the override for the shutdown will come first.
Yes.
But, how is it going to work that Trump is going to agree to do anything useful? He just doesn't see it as in his own interest, and so he doesn't want to. Of course, he was elected to be president of the country, not president of Trump org, but he doesn't see it that way.
Okay. Yes.
And that's probably the main reason why I get so annoyed with media when they try to normalize him, which of course is a huge mistake. One of the tenets of dealing with authoritarianism is to not see the small things, like him going to Iraq to see the troops, this tiny little bit of normalization as somehow representative of the whole. Don't be distracted by that.
Oh, please don't.
And the whole normalization of Trump when he does stuff like that is just incredibly annoying because he hasn't changed. It's still all about him.
Yes.
So, you know what? I think I've got a bunch of stories in the pundit roundup, but some of them are local. Some of them are like interviews with Gretchen Whitmer, who's coming in as Michigan governor, about the sexism she had to put up with during the campaign.
Oh,
things like that. Some of it is talking about moves and maneuvers to look at primary stuff. Armando's always interested in that. This one particularly is from the Hill, talking about the fact that there's a political battle among New Hampshire Republicans about whether or not to endorse President Trump in the 2020 presidential election, which would be a breach of usual practice.
Yes, to say the least.
Typically, they try to stay neutral so that the primary means something, so that they can stay first in the nation. And the Trump people are saying, no, we have to support him because you have to support him because you have to.
I didn't realize that was what they meant.
Trump supporters in the state are trying to repeal the state's decade-old neutrality clause that keeps both parties neutral during the primaries. And veteran political reporter Paul Steinhauser argues that not all Republican leaders are supportive of the effort. There's a lot of Republicans up here that are nervous if the neutrality clause is gotten rid of, if it's repealed, and that if the state party does back a president in the primary, they're worried that New Hampshire could lose its very cherished for 100 years first in the nation primary status. Why? Money.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money at stake in New Hampshire for keeping the primaries competitive. Having New Hampshire first, he says, is something that is jealously guarded up here, and one of the reasons is financial. All the campaigns come up here. They spend a lot of money. It gets a lot of notoriety. It's a very small state.
Yes, and I'm sure it's huge to them. How interesting, though, that I don't think they have that much to worry about. I mean, honestly, if I bet they could get away with it.
South Carolina is going to try to get rid of the primary altogether so as not to embarrass Trump.
Oh, well, there's a lot going on in the background to try to not embarrass him. But I doubt very much that the Republican Party at this point, I mean, what would happen? Say they endorse, right, and up in the New Hampshire Republican Party.
And then what's the point of going?
I don't know. But the Republican Party isn't going to endanger I don't think is going to be the one that revokes their first in the nation status. How would they explain that one? Because you backed Trump, we're taking away the first in the nation status. Trump would go wild.
Interesting. Why should anybody go up there and cover it? We all know what's going to happen. Why don't we just spend all our time in Iowa?
Why don't they? All right, they'll just steal money they'll steal gold out of Fort Knox and give it to New Hampshire. I don't really know why. I mean, I understand why it would not be a competitive primary as a result, and why they would lose a lot of money. But the fear that the Republican National Party would say, yeah, no more New Hampshire.
There's a lot of pressure to get rid of
Trump.
New Hampshire as first in the nation anyway.
That's
true. That is something they constantly deal with.
Anything
that puts their finger on the scale and makes it even more difficult, it's got to be a little nerve-wracking for them.
I guess. I'm wondering what. Well, I recommend that they try it, and that the party freak out and move their first primary. That way, that'll be happening. I'll be glad.
This gets back to the whole theme that Trump's.
Besides, it gets us closer to the second coming.
Yeah, but the idea that Trump's base of support is so totally solid that all these stories about people peeling off just aren't true. Well, if that's the case, why are New Hampshire Republicans fighting about the primary? Why are South Carolinians fighting about the primary? These are supposed to be states that are like totally in his pocket. But that's not what we're seeing here.
Yeah. Well, it's complicated. Up in New Hampshire. Small state, everybody's in the legislature.
I would just continue to suggest that Trump support remains complicated and not a given. And if you're not a white evangelical, then your vote is up for grabs.
Yes.
There's a lot of hold your nosers who are not white evangelicals who don't see Trump as being one step closer to the rapture. And, if he screws up more, as he almost guaranteed to do because he is who he is, this is going to turn out to be important down the road. So I'll leave you with that. I'll leave you with the other stories in the Pundit Roundup. There's an interesting one that the New York Times the Washington Post put together, a really fascinating story, a really lot of hard work done to put together a story of the 4 million children enduring lockdowns in the last school year.
Yes.
Which left many of them traumatized.
Not the story.
And Robert Schlesinger has a great think piece here, also from the Pundit Roundup. Trump doesn't care about governing or being reelected. He only cares about being popular with his base, which really puts a nice bow around the theme that we all know. We know he's not governing for the rest of the country. But he has some interesting quotes and interesting observations. For example, he says, we live in communities where most of our manufacturing jobs, he's talking about the Republican base in the Midwest especially, have been shipped overseas. Opioids are ravaging our communities. Our families are coming apart, they added, according to Whit Ayers, who's a Republican pollster. And we're faced with a choice between a man who said he'd help us and a woman who called us deplorable. What the hell did you expect us to do? But while damn the other voters full speed ahead worked against Clinton with, not to mention James Comey and Vladimir Putin's fingers on the scale, it hasn't produced much beyond thrashing and smashing in office. Is it likely to carry Trump to victory again in 2 years? It's either rewriting the rules of politics or it's spectacularly self-destructive politically, and early signs point to the president getting burned by the Trumpster fire he has so gleefully stoked. Of course, that's my position, and therefore I think it's a wonderful article.
Okay. Well, that is interesting. The prose is entertaining as well. What so gleefully we stoked by the twilight's last gleaming, I guess, is the next line.
Bombs bursting.
Yeah, well, there's certainly some of that. Okay, well, that gives us plenty to consider. And by the way, I was just told that we had a call earlier on the robot call-in line, and I figured out now why the robots traders on Wall Street are happy with the volatility, because it gets us closer to Skynet. So This is exactly what's it's spreading everywhere. You don't have to be a white. These are silver evangelicals, by the way, robots.
Oh, nice.
They're metal, as you know.
And then one last piece here, which just fits in the theme, so I'll add it, and this is from AP.
Except C-3PO, he's gold.
Trump's reluctant backers sour on his leadership and policies. This is from Michigan. They're less likely to call themselves conservative, less likely to be evangelical Christians, and more likely to have voted for Democrats in 2018. They are more educated, somewhat more likely to be women, more likely to live in suburbs. These are people who are just, they voted for Trump reluctantly, but they're not necessarily going to do it again.
Who are these
again,
people?
that goes with all of this. Let me give you that article directly.
Yeah, I need to know who are these people.
Make it easier for you. Well, they read like what we used to call Reagan Democrats.
Oh, yeah, those are fake.
The pictures make them look like Reagan Democrats.
True, I see that. That knit hat and is that a leather jacket? I can't.
Well, it looks like a
members only jacket. I don't know.
Red Wing set.
Okay, yeah.
And for you, just for your reading pleasure, because you like the prose, is Robert Schlesinger's piece about how Trump doesn't care about governing.
All right.
And then, of course, that wonderful Washington Post piece about the poor kids doing all the lockdowns. So that's what I'll leave you with.
Trend
and I'll be back on Monday? Will you be back on Monday?
What the hell's going on? Oh, it's the New Year's. Is that
New
going to
Year's
be
Day.
New Year's Day? Oh, New Year's Eve. Yeah, sure. We'll do New Year's Eve. New Year's Day,
Okay.
Not so much. Besides, you don't come in on Tuesdays.
Yeah, so I don't care.
Right.
I don't care what you do.
If you don't care, I don't care. All
but,
right.
But I'll see you on Monday.
Very good. Thanks very much, Greg. All right. Yeah,
All
it's
right.
already Thursday. I forgot about that. Thanks again. We got us
Alrighty, take
started.
care.
You do the same. Have a good weekend. It's one of those weird weekend, a mid-holiday weekend. And, still Kwanzaa, so we can always get in on some of that action. Let's see. Where was I? There was something else right on as I was watching. Oh, yes, right. The lockdown story. I was interested in that one. I haven't read it yet, and I think it looked like a pretty in-depth piece. I don't think we're going to be able to fit it in today. I just note for the record, once again, so there's sort of the gun fail beat. Innovative and trend-setting again. It is what we used to call on our corner of the interwebs with one of our hashtags, the Lockdown Nation hashtag. I used to made some effort for a short amount of time. Couldn't keep up with both that and gun fail at the same time and just conduct the rest of my life. But noting how often schools did find themselves in lockdown, not even including the lockdown drills that they do as a matter of course and they're scheduled, but the number of unscheduled lockdowns going on around the country. I think they're a little overprotective with them, although, I suppose the the thinking is you don't want to risk anything. But I saw that there were an awful lot of school lockdowns prompted by things like an armed robbery within, 1 mile radius of the school. So there's an armed suspect out there somewhere who robbed the jewelry store, and we don't know where he is, so they'll lock the school down. I guess on the theory that, an armed and dangerous person is near a school and you don't want him coming in and shooting up the school, though I don't I don't know that we've ever had any indication whatsoever that there was such a category of criminals out there, but eventually one will show up and you'll be the one that didn't lock the school down, and the guy who robbed the jewelry store and is being pursued by police flees to a school and decides to go out by, I don't know whether a hostage taking or just shoot a bunch of people. I guess nothing's beyond the pale anymore. It's just seems a little strange, and I guess we can hope against hope that day never actually arrives, but our trajectory, I guess, is such that eventually it will. So I suppose that's what we're going to have to put up with lockdowns until then. But, once again, I think, I don't know that we didn't popularize the hashtag the same way that we did with gun fail. Gun fail, at least I know, got seen by an awful lot of reporters and began to change the way that they reported on gun violence, not because they were watching me tweet it, but because other people were sharing it and it got shared around. And that's the beauty of Twitter, is you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily about hearing it directly from the source. It's just making sure that it's injected into the bloodstream somewhere in ways that will reach reporters, and reporters will begin to realize, they'll see one of these tweets and say, what is this gun fail hashtag? And they'll look into it and they'll begin to see, oh my gosh, accidental shootings are actually a huge problem. Don't think we got to that level with Lockdown Nation, but that was clearly where we were going to have to go next with the reporting. So there we go. We bring it to you ahead of time. It wasn't necessarily a production of our radio show here, but in my all-encompassing umbrella. As you know, like Donald Trump, I look at all of the pieces of my vast empire as under my particular control and attributable to my particular genius. How about that? I don't know. That sounds pretty good. My laptop doesn't sound all that good at the moment, though. The fan is blazing away and giving us a nice background hum, but I hope that it's not coming out through the... Figuring the likelihood of streaming that and having your very finely attuned computer speakers pick up on that is probably not creating too much of a problem. All right. There's lots to look at here, and no telling which ones we'll have time for and which ones we won't, but there's a lot of interesting counter narratives out there for us to add on, to toss onto the fire, I guess. We're coming up on the second break, our 1 minute break at the top of the hour. And let's see, what can we throw in there? Here's a relatively short one here, although I'm not clear on, how long is the piece here? Let's take a quick look. An update on the situation in North Carolina's 9th District. I see a tweet here from Equality North Carolina pointing to a North Carolina Policy Watch entry here, which neither of which am I familiar with. I understand from the name what Equality North Carolina is going to be all about, but Policy Watch I'm not familiar with. Federal prosecutors knew of Bladen County voting allegations but took no action, leading to the North Carolina 2009 election fraud. The Policy Watch piece that is linked here, let's take a quick look at it before our break comes up. Documents reveal apparently federal prosecutors knew of Bladen County voting allegations but took no action. Joe Killian is the name is on the byline here. NC Policy Watch, stories and voices that matter. Well, that's good. It's a nice way of from the project of the North Carolina Justice Center. This North Carolina Policy Watch, the NCSBE, the State Board of Elections, investigation of the above complaints began. Is this a screen grab? Yeah, of the exhibit in the case here. The State Board of Elections compiled evidence and interviews detailing a systematic ballot fraud operation in Bladen County 2 years ago, well before the current controversy that seems likely to force a new election in the 9th Congressional District race. It's the wrong answer, but there it is. The board forwarded their information in a detailed summary to state and federal prosecutors. According to 278 pages on multiple investigations released by the state board this week, no prosecutions resulted. Instead, McCrae Dowless, you remember his name in all of this, a convicted felon, influential political operative, he's both, and Bladen County elected official, was allowed to expand the for-profit ballot harvesting operation, and again, they have to come up with a new name for that is now making national headlines. And it wasn't until Pastor Mark Harris narrowly bested, put that in scare quotes, incumbent Representative Robert Pittenger in the May Republican primary, and then appeared to defeat Democrat Dan McCready by just 905 votes in November, that the extent of Dallas's operation was exposed. We'll perhaps read up more on what they missed out on after this short break. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with taking a look at the North Carolina story here. The State Board of Elections and Ethics Enforcement, as you know, refused to certify the election despite continued pressure from the state Republican Party to do so. I wonder if that ends up being better or worse. Anyway, calls have continued to mount for a new election. I think, of course, the answer is you disqualify 906 of Harris's ballots and just say the guy who we don't have evidence is cheating this way gets installed as the winner. But okay, apparently they're not going to go for that down there. Some of the state's most prominent election watchdogs say it should never have gotten to this point. That's the key part of this story. Allison Riggs, I guess that's one of the most prominent election watchdogs, a senior attorney with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, an organization that has taken a lead role in representing disenfranchised voters in lawsuits that have repeatedly led to laws and redistricting maps being struck down in court. The board's recent release, which documents just what it knew and communicated to prosecutors about Dowless's operation, showcases just how much politics have come to trump, lowercase t, trump evidence, get it, in the way such cases are handled, she said. This is a huge failure of our criminal justice system to protect voters, said Riggs. Since 2016, they have had information about criminal activity affecting thousands of votes, and instead, the U.S. Attorney's Office has concentrated on 19 non-citizens who made a mistake in voting and gotten one plea where he said, I made a mistake, I thought I was good to go. Interesting. So there you have it. There's more to it. We'll read more. But remember, I want you to throw back for a bit here. Remember, this goes back to like the George W. Bush days, and I'm sure probably before then too, but it was most clearly highlighted because they caught them red-handed, making sure that their selections for U.S. attorneys around the country were dedicated to the proposition, to borrow from Abraham Lincoln, because he's a Republican, dedicated to the proposition that not all men are created equal, and neither are all women, and in fact we should be trying to block the darker skinned of them from actually exercising the franchise. I think that's what Lincoln was all about back in the day, but maybe I misunderstand the man. Anyway, remember that they were being hired on the basis of, or retained once hired, they were being retained on the basis of their willingness to agree that it would be made a priority for U.S. attorneys around the country, including their own offices, that they would be looking for A, ways to prosecute Democrats in particular, and B, looking for evidence of voter fraud being perpetrated by Democrats in particular, so that they could undermine the integrity of America's elections that way. And I'll bring this point up. I'll bring it up in this context. Don't, for God's sake, I don't think any of you listening have any inclination toward letting Karl Rove rehabilitate his image in the shadow of the enormous and slightly different kind of disaster that Donald Trump is versus the George W. Bush era. But he's actually spent some time in the past 2 years trying to distance himself somehow from the Trump debacle and hold himself out as some sort of as some sort of never Trumper. But the chief underlying problem with the Trump administration, such as it is that it came to exist as a result of an active, program of active measures to undermine the integrity of America's elections. That's exactly what Karl Rove was trying to do when he was in the White House. It's just that he wasn't, as far as we know, involving the Russians in it. He simply wanted to have domestic terrorism be responsible for undermining the integrity of America's elections. Prosecute Democrats wherever possible. Find those instances of voter fraud that we can find so we can make claims that there are, in fact, millions of such votes. And that's been key to Trumpism ever since. I don't know why he thinks he can disclaim responsibility for that. So here's one example of exactly that. And it's being continued 10 years down the road by who? By the very next Republican administration. One of my chief complaints about all of our reaction under the Obama administration and the Democratic Congress that we enjoyed for a short period of time after the 2008 and then the 2010 elections ending it. But one of my chief complaints was that it seemed like Democrats in Washington weren't responding to the very clear signals that I was perceiving that something had to be done here, that defeating Republicans at the ballot box in 2008 was not enough. First in 2006 and then in 2008 with the presidential election, not enough. And although it became the official policy of, well, we don't look backward, we look forward to the future, and it was great to have the Affordable Care Act and all of that, every other time that we're asked to multitask, we always say we can do it. And it bothered me then, and as you can see, it's bothering me now. My argument was always, you are taking a tack that virtually guarantees that this is nothing more than a temporary reprieve from Republican criminality. You are going to have not only more of it, but it'll be Republican recidivism. The very same people will likely make their way back into government and do the exact same things, which should come as no surprise to anyone. Of course, one of the ways to prevent specific Republican operatives, individual operatives, from coming back into government and pulling the same tricks is to use the tool of impeachment to remove them from office the first time or impeach them after the fact, if necessary, and bar them from office. Don't forget that one of the punishments available, one of the remedies available under impeachment is barring an individual, an impeached and convicted individual, from further government service. And gosh, that could have been useful in a number of instances. Just a few that come to mind, of course. Well, there are a number of repeat players as between the George W. Bush administration and the Trump administration, but this goes a way back. I mean, my classic example here is always Elliott Abrams. You can't get rid of this guy. What if you were able to pull the plug on Elliott Abrams's government service last time? It would have been fantastic. Meanwhile, the same program is underway here. The U.S. attorneys under George W. Bush are continuing the policies of, the U.S. attorneys under Donald Trump are continuing the U.S. attorneys and DOJ's illegal and unconstitutional program of activities begun, or at least highlighted to the public, under George W. Bush. Karl Rove's own program is still in operation here. Now I'll get back to the rest of the article. I had to take that time out for commentary. So again, what sparked all of this is that they find out in the U.S. Attorney's Office in 2016 that the absentee ballots are being collected by Dallas again, and either the Democratic votes are thrown in the trash, or in the primary, Republican ballots are being filled out for empty ballots are being filled out or requested on behalf of people who have no idea, and then collected and filled out on behalf of whoever's hired Dallas, and it's changing the outcome of elections. And the U.S. attorney knows all about it and says, yeah, but they're Republicans, essentially, and decides to do nothing. What do you know? Bob Hall, former executive director of Democracy NC, Democracy North Carolina, is still active in investigating and filing complaints related to ethics and elections. He said Robert Higdon, appointed last year by President Donald Trump to serve as U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of North Carolina, has followed the Republican Party line on election fraud. Don't forget that that's a party line, and it goes back a long way. That means pursuing cases that advance the GOP narrative of supposedly rampant voter fraud by non-citizens and convicted felons, Hall said, while essentially ignoring much more complicated and statistically prevalent fraud by convicted felons, like McCrae Dowless, like absentee ballot tampering. He's a convicted felon. Why are we not following this guy? And why does he get the vote, by the way? What's the North Carolina law there? If the election rigging operation in Bladen County looked like it involved a group of non-citizens voting, Higdon would have deployed the FBI in a heartbeat, Hall said. Imagine what his office would have done if it had reports of white conservative voters being victimized by multi-year ballot stealing operations led by black operatives. Instead, the reports his office received from the State Board of Elections pointed to the reverse scenario, which wasn't Higdon's priority, and why the FBI only recently got involved. Why are we not getting Higdon fired here? Earlier this year, Higdon's office issued subpoenas on behalf of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to the North Carolina Elections Board and more than 40 county boards in the eastern third of the state. The move led voting rights advocates to ask why federal investigators and prosecutors seem to be concentrating so heavily on non-citizens when so much evidence of absentee ballot fraud had been served up for years by the State Board of Elections. From what I've picked up, the political agenda of the U.S. Attorney's Office is clear. They're not supposed to have one, but they do, and here it is. Their priority is from Washington down, just as George W. Bush and Karl Rove wanted it. And, by the way, Hans von Spakovsky and what was the other guy's name? I can't even remember all their names. What was the guy's name that had the most ridiculous? Well, Hans von Spakovsky is among the more ridiculous names. But there was another one whose name was like Schlack. I can't even remember what's this guy's name. Maybe you can remember. If I had a staff or more commercials, I could look him up. But anyway, Schlossman, that's it. Bradley Schlossman. Wasn't that his name? I think it just popped into my head. Okay, let's see. So from what I've picked up, the political agenda of the office is clear. Their priority is from Washington down. They have more of a political agenda as to what is going to take priority, There have been efforts to get them involved, to get the FBI involved in all of this much earlier. Let's read on a little bit more. There are 100 counties in North Carolina. The State Board of Elections currently has 4 investigators to look into irregularities reported across the state in nearly every election. A 5th investigative position exists, but is currently unfilled, a board spokesman confirmed this week. Federal prosecutors really have more resources and better tools to investigate crimes in rural areas where everybody knows everybody, and people are not ashamed of what? I'm not sure, but Hall said the bad guys will just lie. That part. Lie to investigators from the Board of Elections. They're not intimidating enough to some of these characters. You really need the resources of the U.S. Attorney's Office, I see what you mean, and the FBI to put pressure on some of the lower level people to get them to spill the beans on how this operation works and flip on the bigger fish. I've heard that plan before. But the political will has to be there, Hall said, especially in complicated cases like the one in the 9th District, which isn't even all that complicated, it seems. But he says, where there are many moving pieces, multiple potential offenders, and a long history of apparent violations. Sometimes it's hard to get that smoking gun in some cases, Hall said, so I think they look at the easier thing. Somebody who was on probation and they didn't realize they couldn't vote and they tried to. They pursue that, they prosecute that, and they make a big deal out of that. Last month, Joshua Malcolm, a Robeson County Democrat and member of the state elections board, recently appointed chairman, said he was very familiar with the history of unfortunate activities, that's in quotes, in his part of the state. I am not going to turn a blind eye to what took place. To the best of my understanding, which has been ongoing for a number of years, that has been repeatedly referred to the United States Attorney and the district attorneys for them to take action and clean it up, Malcolm said. Bit jumbled there. This he said at the board's meeting on November 27th. In my opinion, those things have not taken place. Multiple people have now come forward to say in interviews and sworn affidavits that they were paid by Dowless and his associates to collect masses of absentee ballots in the district. That's illegal because of concerns of tampering. A close race could be turned by either forging unsealed ballots or simply failing to turn in enough of one candidate's mail-in ballots to give and another is what it says, a huge advantage among those voting absentee, and I suppose there could certainly be more than 2 candidates. Harris admits he hired Dowless, who worked closely with Red Dome Group, the political consulting firm to which Harris paid $428,908 for work in the primary and general elections. But Harris said he had no idea that Dowless may have done something illegal, and Dowless himself has, through an attorney, denied any of his work broke the law. The numbers and Dowless's documented history have raised suspicions that not everything in the election was strictly in bounds. 7% of the ballots cast in Bladen County were absentee mail-in ballots, the highest percentage of any of the 8 counties that make up the 9th District. 7%. 8 counties, 9th District. That's fun. In the GOP primary, Harris won 96% of Bladen County's mail-in ballots, an extraordinary showing against the Republican incumbent. In the general election, Harris took 61% of the county's mail-in absentee vote in a race where only 19% of the mail-in ballots came from registered Republicans. In order for that to happen, Harris would have gotten, there we are, all of the mail-in absentee votes of the 19% of registered Republicans, nearly all of the unaffiliated voters who used that method, and some of the Democrats who voted that way as well. More than 3,400 of the mail-in absentee ballots requested by voters in the 9th District were reported unreturned, according to the State Board of Elections. Most of those were in Bladen and Robeson counties and can be tied to precincts with high percentages of minority voters. It's a complex scheme and can be difficult for the average person to understand. Not really, I think we got our handle on that. But for investigators in the state board, it sounded awfully familiar. And that's because Bladen County has faced at least 5 investigations of this sort of fraud since 2010. Indeed, in 2016, the board detailed its findings about Dowless's operation in the starkest possible terms when it referred his case to the U.S. Attorney. The interviews led to information strongly suggesting that Leslie McCrae Dowless Jr., a.k.a. McCrae Dowless, who who is associated with the Patriots for Progress, i.e. PAC, Independent Expenditure PAC, and who is the recently elected candidate for Soil and Water Conservation District Supervisor in Bladen County. How about that? Was paying certain individuals to solicit absentee ballot requests and to collect absentee ballots from Bladen County voters, the board's 2016 report read. In doing so, workers employed by Dallas were required to hand carry the ballots to Dallas in order to be paid, the report read. Dallas allegedly instructed his workers to push votes for certain candidates while meeting with voters. Possession of an absentee ballot for delivery to a voter or return to a county board of elections by anyone other than the voter's near relative, or the voter's verifiable legal guardian is a Class 1 felony under NCGS 163-226.3A6. How do you like that for the North Carolina Code? The report detailed interviews with Caitlin Kroom and Matthew Mathis, a couple who said they were paid by Dallas first to collect absentee ballots from voters and then to collect and deliver them to him. Dallas denied this to investigators and the board. I guess there's the shameless lying they were talking about. He offered $225 for 20 collected ballots, according to the couple. They also told investigators Dallas attempted to interfere with the investigation into his activities by instructing them to lie about how the operation worked and to deny anything illegal had taken place. So some obstruction of justice there. If it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for McCrae Dallas. Riggs, the attorney with the Southern Coalition for Social Justice, said the revelations in the documents released by the Board of Elections this week are shocking, essentially showing that Dallas's documented vote harvesting scheme was allowed to thrive and grow while federal prosecutors were aware and made no indictments. Let's indict Donald Trump for this one. Why not? Seriously, how far up does this one go? I mean, I don't think he has any idea, but this is a U.S. Attorney Office problem. And last time we said there's a problem in the Office of the U.S. Attorneys, our so-called liberal media dismissed that out of hand in the beginning, and it took, pressure from the blogosphere, and in particular from Josh Marshall at Talking Points Memo to actually drum through their skulls that this was a real thing and a real story. And they had to apologize afterwards, but not that they've gotten anywhere with that. They figured the problem ended with George W. Bush's retirement and replacement by Barack Obama. And quite frankly, Barack Obama thought the problem had ended with the installation of Barack Obama too. But it didn't. What do you know? Let's see. Where we were talking about Riggs making comments on this. It's shocking that it took this long to come out. I think they did the right thing in referring it up to prosecutors, but they, state elections officials, can do a lot more to make information like this available and update the public on these referrals, Riggs said. If there's no movement, they could do more to make sure the public is aware they haven't heard back from state or federal prosecutors, Riggs said. If we had this information, we could have been doing some work and bringing some pressure. If we'd been aware the state and federal prosecutors had all of this and were dropping the ball. In the harsh light of recent media attention, the board has released a trove of information on current and past investigations into ballot fraud investigations in the district. But it shouldn't take a questionable congressional race turning into a media spectacle to get the board to be that transparent, Riggs said. I will say, I'm sad it came to this, but I'm heartened that it does seem like the state board are doing the right thing by releasing some of this stuff, Riggs said. By being more transparent, it allows groups like mine and others to bring public pressure. You have to have the information to do that. Unfortunately, Riggs said current legislation could make the process of investigations even more opaque to the public. As Policy Watch reported this week, House Bill 1029, now awaiting signature or veto from Governor Roy Cooper, would make all state board of elections investigations confidential, effectively shutting the door to any public scrutiny, particularly when it comes to campaign finance violations. Why would you do that? Well, you would do that if you wanted to cover up your campaign finance violations, I guess. The bill would also limit who could file a complaint with the state board, restrict investigators in how far back they could look at allegations, and require second investigations before evidence could be turned over to a prosecutor. That is going to make it much harder to investigate and prosecute things like this. For complaints to be heard, everything, Riggs said. What we're seeing now in the 9th District isn't voter fraud, making an important point. Riggs said, the voters haven't done anything wrong. It's vote theft. We have the laws on the books to deal with it. We don't need new laws making it harder. All good points from Riggs at the end there. And one more I would just go back and highlight again, that the bill that they're talking about, House Bill 1029 in the North Carolina State Legislature, I guess it's out of the legislature now and with the governor. And I don't know whether anything has happened in the time since this article was written. I don't know what the date on it is. I'll scroll back up to the top, I guess, and take a quick look. The 21st of December. So it's possible that the governor has made his decision already, but we'll have to look into that. Because look at this. The bill would, in addition to limiting who could file a complaint, this part got me, restrict investigators in how far back they could look at allegations, and require second investigations before evidence could be turned over to a prosecutor. So I'm concerned here, considering that we've just outlined that this is a continuation of a program on the part of the U.S. Attorney's Office, anyway, a continuation of a program that, A, is now, 10, 12, 14 years old, maybe even older than that, and one that we thought we were rid of by changing administrations. But once again, just to reiterate the point, we only put in stasis. In other words, you're only really, I guess you're only entitled to free and fair elections when there's a Democrat in office, in control of the federal law enforcement apparatus. And, who knows what they're missing along the way. I mean, obviously, this sort of thing could have been going on in North Carolina, and evidence is not making its way to the U.S. Attorney's Office at some point. But I would want to look way back here. I think the inclusion in this storyline of the U.S. Attorney's Office demands linking it back to the George W. Bush days and making a big deal of that. And I don't know that we have the platform to do that right now, but look, and there's so many other things to be paying attention to. I know it's hard to single this one out, but it seems fairly critical. I mean, even if you're willing to settle for a reality in which there's law and order in the country under a Democratic president, and there's not under a Republican president. It's out the window. One of the chief obstacles to getting law and order every once in a while is going to be the fact that they can just cheat and keep Republicans in office, and we're just going to have to live with it for as long as they're in office. And until a Democrat can somehow squeak into the White House, we have no prospect of living under a lawful and constitutional regime. That sounds like a bad prospect to me. I don't like it. That's not the way I wanted things to set up. All right. Well, we talked our way through another segment, and we're on our way into another break. But, we'll look for a couple more short stories that we can throw in there and get on the record before throwing things in the last segment to some of the longer reads. How about this one? Did you remember seeing just before Christmas and just following the end of congressional work on, doing nothing and getting into the shutdown? You remember the tweeted photo of Donald Trump sitting at his otherwise empty desk with a giant stack of bills. I look at all the important things I'm signing here because I'm such an important president. And I think that he had something like, it's 27, 20, 30, 40, something. 37 sticks in my head. I'm not sure if that's the right number. He had a stack of bills to sign. And we may have gotten in before taking the break, or perhaps in our recorded show on Monday, the fact that some 75% or so of the bills stacked up on his desk were, in fact, for naming post offices rather than doing anything of substance. And then there was some reports even that the bill he had in front of him for the picture that he was signing might actually have been a blank piece of paper, although why, that would have been necessary. I have no idea. I guess unless the White House knew that there were 37 bills on their way to his desk, and before the day ended, they wanted the photo out there, but the bills hadn't made their way to his desk. That's entirely possible. They hadn't been enrolled and sent to the White House yet, so they just took out some blank spares and stacked them up on his desk. This is what it's going to look like when those bills get here. That would explain having a blank one in front of him anyway. But yeah, it's something like 24 or 25 out of the 37 were for post office renamings. And there was one in there, I think, renaming the post office in, the Seattle area, maybe perhaps, for Jimi Hendrix, which sounded like a fun thing to do. But there was another one. Trump signs a bill, according to the Monday report from CNN. Trump signs a bill naming a post office for Captain Humayun Khan. I don't know how I've mangled his first name again, but we're talking about Mr. Kaiser Khan's son, who you remember, of course, he was singled out and attacked by Donald Trump during the conventions. Yeah, he got a post office. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And yes, just to continue with that story, just to make sure that we all understand. I don't know exactly how it ended up happening. My guess is that Donald Trump, didn't read any of the bills that he was signing, and may not even have recognized the name, but perhaps you did. I say Kaiser, Khizr. I'm sure it's maybe pronounced like Kaiser Khan. I'm not certain how he pronounces it, but you remember that he ended up speaking at the Democratic National Convention along with his wife, Ghazala. I'm guessing again at the pronunciation and the emphasis there, who was on stage with him. Remember, you'll recall that she seemed like she was overcome with the emotion of and didn't actually make any remarks during her husband's speech. But and you'll recall that they came under attack during the campaign because Donald Trump, doesn't really have any regard whatsoever for anybody in any capacity ever. But after all of his campaign rhetoric about respect for veterans and the families of veterans, not ones that aren't for Trump. So we're against those guys. Anyway, as it turns out, there's been a U.S. post office named for their son, and I'm going to try again at the first name, Humayun, Humayun. I'm not certain where the pronunciation, where the emphasis goes. Humayun Khan, and you'll recall his story that he was a captain in the U.S. Army, killed in Iraq, as I recall, by a car bomber. Is that correct? And who had taken extraordinary measures to try and protect his troops during the incident as well. Awarded a Bronze Star for his actions, and so he's quite properly had a post office named after him. By the way, it's in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the bill, by the way, was introduced by Tom Garrett, a Virginia Republican who's now retiring from Congress, but got this postal facility named for him, and it's a little bit ironic, except for the fact that, well, maybe that's doubly ironic. Donald Trump doesn't read anything, and even if he had, he's forgotten about this whole thing a long time since, I'm sure. Anyway, just thought I'd enter that one on the record. A few other stories floating around that have captured some attention this morning. I thought it was a little unusual. I noticed I had mentioned Josh Marshall and Talking Points memo earlier in the show, and they're reporting on the surprise Iraq visit, summed up in this tweet saying, Trump's surprise visit spurs Iraqi lawmakers to demand U.S. withdrawal. So they're actually so annoyed at the stunt that they figure they'll jump on the bandwagon. Maybe it's a smart thing to do. If withdrawal is what they want, now is a good time to get it, given that Trump is committed to the withdrawal from Syria and from and drawing down half the troops in Afghanistan as well. It might be time to get everybody out of Iraq after all. And besides, of course, he's now also committed to the position that ISIS has been totally and utterly defeated. So what would be the necessity of staying? So let's take a look at this one. It's actually an AP story that is running at TPM. TPM is tweeting it around, and, from the Twitter feed, you can't tell what content is theirs and what content is aggregated, but I guess we should have guessed. TPM didn't send anybody to Iraq. It's an AP story. Instead, Philip Issa, or perhaps he says Issa, ISSA, just like the former congressman, no, almost former congressman, anyway. Iraqi lawmakers Thursday demanded U.S. forces leave the country in the wake of a surprise visit by President Donald Trump that politicians denounced as arrogant and a violation of Iraqi sovereignty. Politicians from both blocs of Iraq's divided parliament called for a vote to expel U.S. troops and promised to schedule an extraordinary session to debate the matter. And, Bill had tipped us off to the news that both of the blocs in the Iraqi parliament were upset with the visit, but I didn't know that they were calling for expulsion of U.S. forces. Parliament must clearly and urgently express its view about the ongoing American violations of Iraqi sovereignty, said Salam al-Shimiri, a lawmaker loyal to the populist cleric. Populist, I'm laughing at too. Cleric, also a fun word for us. But that populist cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr. Anyone remember that guy? Trump making his first presidential visit to troops in a troubled region Wednesday. So that doesn't count Coast Guard at Mar-a-Lago. Said he has no plans to withdraw the 5,200 U.S. forces in the country. So now we got controversy. I have no plans to, but I might just do it. Containing foreign influence has become a hot-button issue in a year that saw al-Sadr supporters win the largest share of votes in the May elections. Al-Sadr has called for curbing U.S. and Iranian involvement in Iraqi affairs. That would seem to be a winning position in Iraq, I would think. U.S. troops are stationed in Iraq as part of the coalition against the Islamic State group, and we don't need that anymore. American forces withdrew in 2011 after invading in 2003, but returned in 2014 at the invitation of the Iraqi government to help fight the jihadist group. But after defeating IS militants in their last urban bastions last year, Iraqi politicians and militia leaders are speaking out against the continued presence of U.S. forces on Iraqi soil. Qais Khazali, I'm murdering the name, no doubt, the head of the Iran-backed Asaib al-Haq militia, that fought key battles against IS in North Iraq, promised on Twitter that Parliament would vote to expel U.S. forces from Iraq, or the militia and others would force them out by, quote, other means. Ew. So I wouldn't be opposed, in theory, to leaving under those circumstances. I mean, I would rather leave under friendly circumstances like, thanks, we defeated ISIS. Thanks for your help. See you later. And we could have gotten that. But instead we got this. Why? Because Trump was angry about being criticized about not visiting the troops, so he pulled an impromptu drop in, and he didn't follow any of the protocols, and another president could have smoothed this over, but not Trump. Well, let's see. Is there more that we need to know here? Khazali, by the way, jailed by British and U.S. forces from 2007 to 2010 for managing sections of the Shia insurgency against the occupation during those years. His militia is represented in Parliament by the Binaa, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, B-I-N-A-A, Binaa bloc, a rival coalition to al-Sadr's Islah. Binaa favors close ties with Iran, really, and is aligned with Tehran on regional political issues. Trump spent 3 hours at a U.S. air base meeting with American troops during his visit. The president defended his decision to withdraw 2,000 U.S. forces from neighboring Syria, saying the U.S. military had all but eliminated IS-controlled territory there. He left without meeting any Iraqi officials, though he spoke to Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi by phone. The Prime Minister's office said in a statement after Trump's visit that, quote, differences in points of view over arrangements led to a face-to-face meeting between the two leaders to be scrapped. I see. Al-Shamiri said Trump's visit violated several diplomatic norms. Yeah, well, his whole presidency violates several of those. All right, another small-scale story I just thought I would note for the record. Doesn't mean that much in the grand scheme of things, but this one I saw fly by from, let's see, let me get my source here. It's SFDB on Twitter, who tweets a lot of, helps us in continuing the gun fail tradition, but has a broader mandate, let's say, than just gun accidents. Asking question, how many good guys with real guns does it take to stop two men shoplifting nail guns? The answer in our NRA world is 6, with 2 shooting out the tires of the getaway vehicle. That sounds pretty exciting, don't you think? Here's the story reported by the AP, and bare bones thing. Let's see. Marysville, Washington is the setting here. Authorities say 2 men were surrounded by customers with guns while attempting to steal tools from Washington's store. This is, remember, this is the fantasy of all concealed carriers, that they're going to stop serious crime. Now, shoplifting is not one that I don't know what the rules of engagement are, and the problem is nobody does. But, look, the Daily Herald, the local paper, reports that the 2 men, ages 22 and 23, allegedly took 4 nail guns, each worth more than $400, from the Coastal Farm and Ranch store Saturday in Marysville. The men walked out of the store, got into a Honda Civic, only to be surrounded by about 6 customers with guns raised, like a movie, right? And were they in a circle around the car so that they would all shoot one another? That's interesting to think about. Court documents say the driver pulled forward, causing one man confronting him to land on the hood. Documents say another customer shot at the driver's side front tire, while a third fired twice at the rear tire. Marysville police found the vehicles, the suspect's theft suspect's car, unoccupied about 3 blocks away, with 2 flat tires and the tools inside. Both men were apprehended after a search. So, not a terrible outcome here. Nobody got shot accidentally. But again, letting bullets fly in the middle of a parking lot is not a super safe thing to do. And I think that probably, more than likely, one person drew a gun on him, and then everybody else said, this is an excuse for me to draw my gun too. Let's all go out there and show that we have guns. Gun advocates, of course, will be holding this up as a huge victory, as opposed to the enormous potential mistake that it really is. And once again, violation of all the rules of engagement. Oh, speaking of which, by the way, Brandon Friedman continues one of the better gun fail traditions from year after year. He noticed a couple of years back, alongside the rest of us, that giving guns for Christmas is a huge American tradition among a certain segment of our population. And social media being what it is, everybody wanted to take pictures of themselves with their new Christmas guns and circulate them on the internet, which is a dumb thing to do for a number of reasons, not the least of which is it's just dumb to take pictures of yourself and circulate them on the internet. But add guns, millions of things can go wrong, including you accidentally shooting yourself, you setting yourself up for failure, you setting yourself up for gun fail inclusion, you setting yourself up to be the butt of jokes when that happens, whatever. In addition to which, alerting everyone in your neighborhood that there's something new to steal out of your house, which is also dumb. But of course, a lot of times the gun enthusiasts think the presence of this gun will prevent this gun from being stolen, when in fact, just physically speaking, the presence of the gun increases the likelihood of guns being stolen from your house, because if there weren't guns there, then guns couldn't be stolen from your house. But beyond all of that, it's just a very dumb thing to do. And what Brandon, though, is looking for is something that we see is relatively common, though he did say he found surprisingly fewer examples this year than in most previous years, which is a good thing, whether that's because more people are handling their guns safely, less people are giving guns for gifts, or it's just that less people are dumb enough to Instagram or otherwise photograph themselves and circulate it on the internet that they have new guns. But Brandon, who is a U.S. Army veteran himself, took particular exception to the pictures of people with their brand new guns violating gun safety protocol, like literally straight out of the box. They've just unboxed the guns and they are holding them up with their fingers on the trigger. A violation of several of the cardinal rules of gun safety. Don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot, for one. And two, treat all guns as if they are loaded at all times. Of course, very often in pointing those things out on Twitter, you get pushback from gun enthusiasts who say, well, there's one time that you absolutely know that the gun's not loaded is when it's just straight out of the box. And the answer to that is, there are multiple answers to that. And one is, hey, you never know anything. Another issue here is, I've collected stories of people who have bought guns from gun shows, what they thought was brand new, but they were in fact loaded after all. And then, of course, the more important, the most salient, I think, of all the points is, look, you people are constantly saying that liberals are too dumb to know that guns make people safe, and guns make people safe because gun owners follow all the rules of gun safety at all times, and that's what keeps us safe. That's what keeps us all from getting injured, accidentally injured or killed, just from being around these inanimate objects. And we follow all rules of gun safety, except when we don't, in which case this doesn't matter. But, honestly, if you're following, if guns make people safe on balance, or always make people safe and never endanger anyone because they're just inanimate objects and guns don't kill people, people kill people, etc. Well, you can't say that that's the case because we always follow the rules if you don't always follow the rules. So that's just the bottom line of it, and people are constantly doing that, and they can't help but take pictures of themselves with fingers on the trigger, and if it's not a conscious decision to put your finger on the trigger, then so much the worse, in my opinion. You don't even know that you're in danger of hurting yourself or others. And of course, very often people point those guns at one another as well, which violates another of the cardinal rules. Never point the weapon at anything you're not willing to kill or otherwise destroy. So, the cardinal rules of gun safety that they're constantly preaching, as you know from listening to the show for many years, are few in number, and they violate almost every single one of them within minutes of unwrapping their gifts, and that's disappointing, to say the very least. Okay, let's see. There are other stories here, and maybe we can give some time over to this one because, I don't know, it's the kind of thing that we got to do. On whatever day we did this, Monday, was it, that we recorded the segment, I got comments from both sides on the story we included in finishing out the Monday roundup from BuzzFeed News, the Yellow Vest riots. Remember, the Yellow Vest riots in France are what happens when Facebook gets involved with local news. I got some notes saying thanks for including that, and I got some notes that said, how dare you? You are a horrible person, and you cannot call yourself progressive. You are, in fact, a regressive force in everything, America, the world. And that caused me to say, I don't give a crap generally about that. I've never really been entirely sure whether I was progressive or not because I never understood exactly what it meant, but I understood that many of you identified yourselves that way, and I trust your judgment, and I like you guys, and I generally agree with you. So I said, I'll identify that way as well, too. Am I liberal? Am I progressive? Am I something else? I don't really know. Regressive, I never really felt was the case. But I said, all right, well, if that article was such crap, how about giving me one that you think is good? And there's plenty of room for this because I don't understand what's going on there. I got it one perspective, what was happening there from BuzzFeed. And of course, we read that article because someone said, hey, I think this is a good article. Would you read this? Sure, I will. And now I have another one. I think this is a good article. Will you read this one? It's from Jacobin magazine, which, well, you know where they come from. And if you do, then you might be interested in this because maybe you wanted to hear something that would give you a different perspective of what was going on. And I think my comment at the end of the BuzzFeed article is I still don't understand what's going on here. So I don't think I learned a great deal about what was happening other than the fact that some people had gotten into this by protesting high gas prices. And I think I agreed, hey, I don't like high gas prices. I'd love for them to be lowered too. Okay, a thing is going on here, and we might be able to skip some work or get something done here and have a good time, and let's protest, so what the hell. And the most interesting thing about it, though, really was that it appeared to be drawing people out in protest who had never otherwise been out in protest. And that is addressed to some extent in this piece here. And the writer here is Aurielle Dianara, who's, I don't know whether she's French or French affiliated in any way, but there's a little accent mark there, so maybe Aurielle is closer to the problem. Anyway, you'll guess where it's going just from the headline. We're with the rebels. France's yellow vest protests against fuel prices weren't organized by the left, but the fight to widen their demands is key to blocking the growth of Marine Le Pen's far right. That sounds like it might be of some interest. Like, okay, we'll tune in on this, right? And I guess maybe my initial confusion about the whole thing is, well, if the protests aren't organized by the left, who did it? And if they're apolitical, am I interested? And are they legit? What's happening here? Do I care? All right. The last 2 weekends, and this is a piece dated, November 30th. So again, harkening back to mid-November. The last 2 weekends have seen mass mobilizations across France by the Gilets jaunes. I think I'm better at that a little bit. Protesting against the increase in fuel prices. On Saturday, November 17th, 282,000 of these yellow vests, so named after their distinctive high-visibility vests, which all motorists have to carry by law, mobilized around the country, mounting roadblocks of road intersections and roundabouts, snail operations to slow traffic, and actions to defy tolls. There were more than 2,000 actions across the country, almost 400 arrests, several hundred injured, and 1 dead. That day saw clashes with the police, and the movement continued over subsequent days without respite, despite repression. On November 24th, according to the Interior Ministry estimate, 106,000 people took part in the protests, including the 800 who made it to Paris for the self-proclaimed Act 2 of the movement. While the police prefecture banned protesters from approaching the Élysée, the presidential palace, in fact, demonstrators did take over the central avenue, Avenue des Champs-Élysées. Oh, probably the worst pronunciation ever, sparking violent clashes with police that continued throughout the day. Some Gilets jaunes have already announced their intention to return to Paris next Saturday. That would already have taken place, of course, but also notable is the media coverage of these protests. Indeed, no other recent social movement in France has had similar visibility. They're wearing visibility vests, you see. For 10 days, the whole French press has been busy figuring out who these unlikely protesters actually are. So they're confused too. Many of them tell journalists that they have never previously demonstrated. It proclaims itself an apolitical citizens movement, and indeed emerged outside of the political and trade union frameworks that usually dominate large mobilizations. This is indeed a composite embryonic movement with many faces. Men and women, employees, precarious workers, those on unemployment benefits, the economically inactive, retirees, teachers, businessmen, and workers. Some party members and trade unionists are there too, mixed in among the mass, They come from both left and right, but they do have one point in common. This is the France that struggles to make it to the end of the month. Simply put, a movement of the people, but not all of them. Interesting. And I mean, it makes you sympathetic, although now I got question marks about workers and businessmen, and in there too. Workers, by the way, get mentioned twice in this somehow. Businessmen, do they struggle to make it to the end of the month? I guess some can. So, which people are they? The people who are mobilizing in the Gilets jaunes movement are the people of peripheral France. And I guess this is where the sympathy comes from Jacobin. Those who come not from large urban centers, but from smaller towns and rural areas. A part of the country that is not usually seen is today rising up. To make itself visible, it wears the fluorescent yellow vest. You know all about those. They came together and organized on social media. A few weeks ago, groups started being created for each département, right? The small administrative units of France, in case you didn't know what I was trying to pronounce there. And sometimes they held a few preparatory meetings before they took to the streets on the dawn of Saturday the 17th. The Gilets jaunes came together to protest against the increase in fuel prices, and with good reason. This year the price of diesel has increased by 23% and petrol by 14% due to the jump in the price of a barrel of oil. In addition, the government has recently announced that diesel and petrol prices will increase further by 4 and 7 cents a liter, respectively, presenting this as a means of financing an ecologically oriented energy transition. And this is what had me confused about the whole thing at the beginning. Like, well, okay, I understand being angry about high gas prices, but the idea, I thought that the majority of the price increase, well, besides the market price increase, was about a fuel tax that was designed to try and lower consumption and finance some sort of green transition. Is that not what's happening? I think it is, but they're still pissed about it. And it means that the protest isn't exactly leftist in orientation. Anyway, continue on because it's complex. You know that. And we're not going to get through all of this, unfortunately. But this announcement has, unsurprisingly, caused great discontent among the lower and middle classes, especially those of peripheral France, most affected by transport costs. For these citizens who travel many miles every day by car, fuel prices can seriously cut into their incomes. In terms of their demands, what are their demands? The Gilets jaunes, first of all, want to get rid of this carbon tax. But behind the anger, there is something else. As they and their supporters have repeated over the last 2 months, to justify their actions, which have stirred no little upset, the fuel price issue is something of a straw that broke the camel's back. The voices heard in recent days express a clear feeling of exasperation. That's clear, but about what? I don't know. The sense of being the objects of contempt of and exclusion by a political class which they generally reject. So this is sort of the Trumpist aspect of it in a way. We're the forgotten men and women of France. Many call for the government and President Emmanuel Macron to resign, which is what everybody yells about whenever you're upset with anything. Is it a realistic possibility? More so in France than here. They continually insist on his low support and weak electoral legitimacy. After all, in last year's presidential contest, he scored only 24% in the first round, and turnout in the runoff hit historic lows. Macron resign is a slogan that thunders through the provinces and along the Champs-Élysées. This feeling of exasperation is the result of years of fiscal and social policies that have gradually strangled the low and middle classes, including in terms of the tax take. Immediately upon reaching office, Macron abolished the Solidarity Wealth Tax, or ISF in French, giving 4 billion euros to the richest. That sounds bad. And has strengthened the tax credit for solidarity and employment, or CICE, a tax cut and exemption program transferring 41 billion euros a year to French companies, including multinationals. Shortly afterwards, with the 2018 budget bill, Macron established a flat tax, that allowed a lowering of taxation on capital, handing another 10 billion euros to the richest. At the same time, the government has increased the general social contribution, or CSG, income tax to be paid by pensioners, while pensions themselves have ceased to be indexed to inflation and thus to retirees' ability to buy consumer goods. It has got rid of the subsidized contracts, which allowed large numbers to work on contracts partly financed by public bodies, and lowered by €5 a month the amount of housing contributions, APL, for the most disadvantaged. As if that were not enough, the new carbon tax will weigh 5 times heavier on the budgets of the middle classes than on the upper classes. Yet the government has taken no steps to counterbalance this obviously unequal treatment, for example, by giving aid to the families on the most modest budgets. Well, that does present a certain amount of difficulty, doesn't it? Let's see if we can finish up this section and tease for the rest of it. We'll come back to this later in the week. Building on policies already implemented by Presidents Nicolas Sarkozy and François Hollande, the effect has been to produce a further massive increase in inequalities. Over the last 2 decades, the largest fortunes in France have increased tenfold, while according to a recent study by OFCE and INSEE, French families' average purchasing power has fallen by €440 a year since the 2008 crisis. And in this context, it is unsurprising that a sense of injustice, and humiliation has spread, as well as that of an arrogant president of the rich. And you can see now why this would be of interest, certainly to Jacobin and to others who protested that we were giving an uneven view of the protests, and I suppose that we were. I'm glad for the opportunity to do this. I don't know why it makes me regressive that I read the other one first, but hey, I disagree with that assessment.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, thanks for listening, and do stay tuned for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next with Justice Putnam. I see Rick Santorum has made it back into his news, blaming Barack Obama for strangling the economy with 7 straight years of economic growth. Well, that's the way it goes in Rick Santorum's mind. Stay tuned for that and much more next.